My mom didn't raise her voice when she cut me out of the family. She stirred sugar into her tea, the spoon tapping the cup softly, and said, "I don't think you should come here anymore." The kitchen smelled like toast and lemon cleaner. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. I waited for her to smile, to say she was joking. She never did. I stood there holding my coat, feeling small in my own childhood home. Realizing that the woman who once kissed my scraped knees had just decided I no longer existed. And I had no idea yet how much she had already taken from me. My name is Ethan Miller. I was 32, living in a narrow rented apartment above a closed tire shop in a town called Redfield. I had always been quiet. The kind of person who held things in, and I worked as a billing clerk in a medical supply office. Every morning started with noise. The air compressors downstairs rattled my bed like a weak earthquake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling the vibration in my bones before I even opened my eyes. It felt like the building was breathing under me, slow and tired, the same way it did. My kitchen window faced a brick wall, no sunrise ever touched it. I drank burnt coffee from a chipped mug and watched steam rise, wondering when my life had started feeling like something I was only passing through. Most mornings, I checked my phone before work. No messages. No missed calls. I hadn't heard from my mom in weeks. Not since she told me I shouldn't come over anymore. That silence weighed more than yelling ever could. That afternoon, I drove past my child house without meaning to. The steering wheel felt slick in my palms. The place looked different. New curtains. Fresh paint. A car in the driveway I didn't recognize. I parked 2 houses down and sat there with the engine running. My chest tight like I was preparing to walk into a hospital room. When I finally knocked, she opened the door halfway. "What do you need, Ethan?" she asked, already tired of me. "I just wanted to talk." She glanced behind her. I smelled a cologne that wasn't my father's, sharp and clean. "This isn't a good time," she said. "You should have called." I nodded, because I didn't trust my voice. She closed the door carefully, like I was something breakable she didn't want to handle. That night, I lay in my dark apartment staring at the ceiling, the hum of traffic drifting through the walls. My stomach fell hollow. I tried to remember the last time she had asked how I was doing. I couldn't. And I still didn't know that this distance wasn't accidental. When my father died, everyone told me my mom had become both parents overnight. I was 19 then, standing beside her at the funeral, holding her arm while she cried into a black handkerchief. Her hand felt cold in mine. I remember thinking I would never let go of her, no matter what. I moved back home for a while after that. The house felt different. Quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. My room was still the same, but I wasn't. I woke up every morning to the creak of the hallway floorboards and the sound of my mom pacing long after midnight. At first, I thought she was just grieving. She stopped asking about my classes. Stopped cooking my favorite meals. If I talked too long, she checked her phone. If I asked a question, she answered with one word. One night I asked her about my dad's savings. Not because I wanted anything, but because the power bill was overdue and I was scared. She didn't look at me. "That's taken care of," she said. I felt heat spread across my face. "Taken care of how?" Her jaw tightened. "Why are you so focused on money? That's your problem." I nodded and went back to my room, my chest tight, feeling like I had done something wrong just by asking. Months passed. I found a pile of unopened mail in the hallway closet one afternoon while looking for a light bulb. Bank envelopes. Property tax notices. All addressed to her. One was already open. Inside was a statement from a property company I didn't recognize. It listed 2 names on the account. Hers, and a man I had never heard of. I stood in the dark closet breathing in dust, my fingers numb as I reread the page. It said joint investment. Multiple properties. That night, I asked her about it. She didn't deny it. She smiled at me like I was slow. "Adults have lives you don't need to understand." The words landed hard in my chest. A year later, I came for Thanksgiving because she said it would be nice to feel normal again. I arrived to find the table already full. Her, my aunt, 2 cousins, and him. He was sitting in my father's chair. She introduced him as a family friend. Not once did she look at me. Dinner tasted like cardboard. They talked about trips I hadn't been invited to. About plans that didn't include me. When I tried to speak, my mom talked over me. At one point she laughed and said, "He's always been too sensitive." Everyone chuckled. My face burned. My ears felt stuffed with cotton. I stared at my hands in my lap, realizing nobody there was on my side. Later that night, I stood alone in the guest room, holding the edge of the bed, because the floor felt unsteady beneath me. My chest hurt, not like sharp pain, but like pressure that wouldn't go away. I understood then that she wasn't just moving on. She was replacing me, and she was careful about it. Legal about it. Quiet. When I asked months later about my father's savings again, she said there was nothing left. That he had debts I didn't know about. That I should be grateful she had kept a roof over my head as long as she did. I nodded, because I didn't have proof. But something in her eyes had changed. She didn't see me as her son anymore. She saw me as a problem she had already solved. And I went home that night with my throat tight, and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not knowing yet that the truth was already sitting in a file somewhere, waiting for me to find it. The letter came on a Tuesday, folded too neatly, like it didn't know it was about to ruin me. I found it mixed in with junk mail on the small table by my door. My hands were still cold from the winter air. I hadn't even taken my shoes off when I opened it. It was from a law office I didn't recognize. My eyes skimmed the first paragraph and my stomach dropped. It said my mother had transferred ownership of the family house and 2 other properties into a living trust. I wasn't named as a beneficiary. Not even mentioned. I stood there in my coat, the paper shaking in my hands, my ears ringing so loudly I couldn't hear the traffic outside anymore. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch. My legs felt hollow like they weren't attached to me. The next paragraph said I had been removed from all future claims regarding my father's estate. I read it again. And again. My fingers went numb. My throat closed like I had swallowed something too big. I called her right away. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail I barely recognized as my own. Mom, I got a letter. I don't understand it, please call me back. She didn't. 3 days passed. No call, no text. Nothing. By Friday, I couldn't sit still anymore. I drove to her house after work, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. The sun was already going down, turning the windows orange. The car I didn't recognize was in the driveway again. I knocked. She opened the door with the same tired look, like I was interrupting something important. What is it now? She said. I held up the letter. My hand was shaking. Why am I not in Dad's trust? She stared at the paper like it bored her. You don't need to be. The words felt like a slap. That was his house too, I said. That was my childhood home. She crossed her arms. You left. You don't get to come back and claim things. I didn't leave, I said. My voice cracked. You pushed me out. Her eyes narrowed. Don't make this dramatic. The man I had seen at Thanksgiving walked into the hallway behind her. He leaned against the doorframe like he belonged there. She didn't introduce him this time. This is a family matter, I said. She tilted her head slightly as family. My chest burned. I felt it in my throat, behind my eyes. You never even told me you were doing this, I said. She shrugged. I don't need your permission. I stood there, my heart pounding, my hands tingling, realizing she had already made her decision long before I ever saw that letter. I left without saying goodbye. That night I paced my apartment until my feet ached. My thoughts went in circles. I replayed every conversation, every moment where I had felt small. My stomach growled, but I couldn't eat. My skin felt too tight for my body. At midnight, I opened my laptop and typed my father's name into a search bar. That was when I found a public record database. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't stop. And the first file I opened changed everything. I didn't sleep that night. The screen light burned my eyes, but I kept scrolling, opening one document after another. Property transfers, loan records, names I didn't recognize showing up again and again beside my mother's. My chest felt tight, like someone had tied a strap around it and pulled. At 3 in the morning, I stood up too fast and had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The room tilted. My heart was beating hard, fast, like it was trying to leave my body. I pressed my palms against my face, breathing in the smell of stale coffee and dust. I tried to remember the sound of my father's laugh. It came to me in pieces. The way he cleared his throat before telling a joke. The way he squeezed my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else now. I lay on the couch when the sun started to rise, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the tire shop downstairs rattled through the floor again, and I realized I hadn't escaped anything. I had just carried it with me. Every childhood moment replayed in my head. My mom standing in the doorway while I packed my first apartment. Not offering to help. My dad telling me years earlier to always trust family. The look on her face when she said the man in my father's chair was family now. My stomach twisted. I rolled onto my side and pulled my knees up. My muscles aching from being tense all night. I tried to tell myself I should let it go. That people change. That money ruins everyone eventually. But the letter was still on the table. Folded. Clean. Final. By the third night with no sleep, I was pacing my apartment like an animal in a cage. My feet were sore. My jaw hurt from clenching it. I kept stopping in the middle of the room because I forgot what I was walking toward. I whispered to myself, what did I do wrong? The answer never came. I opened my laptop again and stared at the names in the documents. Hers, his. Over and over, it wasn't just one property, it was several. And the dates went back years. Years when she had told me there was nothing left. My hands started shaking so badly I had to rest them on my thighs. The skin on my arms prickled like I was cold, even though the heater was on. I stood by the window and pressed my forehead against the glass. It was icy. The street below was empty. I had never felt so invisible in my life. And that was when something shifted inside me. Not anger, not shouting. A quiet decision. I wasn't gonna beg anymore. I said it out loud in my empty room, my voice hoarse. I'm done begging. The words felt strange in my mouth, but also steady. Like I had finally planted my feet somewhere solid. I didn't know yet how I would fix this. I only knew I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening anymore. And somewhere in those files, buried under polite legal language, was the truth she thought I would never find. The next morning, I woke with a headache so sharp it felt like it had edges. My eyes were gritty. My body ached in places I didn't know I had muscles. But I was awake in a different way. I printed everything I had found the night before and spread the pages across my small kitchen table. The coffee maker hissed behind me, but I didn't touch it. My hands trembled as I stacked the papers by date, trying to make sense of years of quiet decisions that had happened without me. The first thing I did was call the county clerk's office. My voice sounded too loud in my own ears. Need copies of property records, I said, forcing myself to breathe slowly. For my father's estate. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. Some documents were public. Some weren't. I would need proof I was related. Proof I had a legal interest. I hung up and stared at the wall. My throat tightened. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. I dug through an old shoebox under my bed where I kept everything I couldn't throw away. Birthday cards from my dad. My high school diploma. A faded photo of the three of us at a lake I barely remembered. At the bottom was his death certificate. I held the paper like it might disappear. My fingers went cold. I remembered the way my mom had stood so straight at the funeral, barely touching me. That afternoon, I took the bus to the courthouse because my car wouldn't start. I sat in the back, gripping the shoebox in my lap, every bump in the road making my stomach jump. The building smelled like old carpet and toner. The clerk barely looked at me when I slid the certificate under the glass. She'd printed a stack of records and handed them to me with a practiced smile. I took them to a corner bench and flipped through, my pulse pounding in my ears. That's when I saw the first inconsistency. A property my father had bought years before his death was transferred to my mom 2 weeks after the funeral. Not inherited. Transferred. With his signature. My father had been unconscious in the hospital that week. I felt a hot wave rush up my neck. My fingers tingled. I had to close my eyes for a moment to keep from getting sick. I went back to the clerk. This signature, I said, tapping the page. This can't be right. She looked at it, then at me. If you think there's a mistake, you should talk to an attorney. I left with my legs shaking. I didn't have money for a lawyer. I barely had money for rent. So I started asking questions instead. I called my aunt, she didn't answer. I emailed my mom, no reply. I found my father's old accountant online and sent a message that felt too long, explaining who I was, apologizing for bothering him. He responded 2 days later. Short. Careful. He said he no longer handled my family's accounts and suggested I contact my mother. I sat in my car outside work with the engine running, staring at his email. My hands were slick with sweat. It felt like every door was closing before I even reached it. The first real setback came a week later. I requested copies of the trust documents from the law office that had sent the letter. They replied with a formal note saying I was not an authorized party and they could not disclose anything to me. I read the email 3 times. My shoulders slumped. The weight in my chest came back heavier than before. That night, I called my mom again. Straight to voicemail. I left a message I shouldn't have. I know what you did, I said, my voice breaking. You can't hide this forever. When I hung up, I realized I had just warned her. 2 days later, the public records website went offline for maintenance. When it came back, several files I had bookmarked were gone. I sat on my couch staring at the screen. My stomach hollow, my heart racing. She was cleaning up. I lay down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The carpet smelled faintly of detergent. My hands were numb. I felt stupid. Slow. Like I had arrived too late to my own life. But one thing I still had was the original printouts. And one name that kept appearing. The man from her house. The man who had taken my father's chair. I wrote his name on a sticky note and stuck it to my wall. Not knowing yet that he was the weakest part of her perfect picture. I started with his name. I typed it into every database I could find. Property listings. Old business registrations. Even social media, though I hated the feeling of spying. My eyes burned after an hour, my shoulders stiff from hunching over the laptop. Then I found a dissolved company tied to him. It had been closed 5 years earlier for failure to report income. The address listed was my mother's house. My pulse thudded in my ears. I printed everything and took the bus across town to the small law office listed on one of the filings. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee. I sat there gripping my folder until my fingers went pale. The attorney was a gray-haired woman with tired eyes. I told her I didn't have money, and that I just needed to understand what I was looking at. She skimmed the pages, her mouth tightening. "This is complicated," she said slowly. "But it looks like assets were moved while your father was incapacitated." The room felt too warm. My shirt stuck to my back. "Is that illegal?" I asked. She hesitated. "Potentially. But you would need proof and witnesses." I left with my legs weak, my heart pounding like I had run a mile. The witness came from a place I never expected. My father's old neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, still lived 2 doors down from my mom. I hadn't spoken to him in years. I knocked on his door with my stomach in knots. He recognized me right away. "You look like your dad," he said softly. We sat at his kitchen table. The air smelled like coffee and fried onions. I told him everything, my voice shaking. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded around his mug. Then he said, "I saw her bring papers to the hospital." My chest tightened. "What papers?" "Full lots of them. She went in and out of that room when your father couldn't even sit up." I closed my eyes, feeling heat flood my face. He agreed to write a statement. The last piece came by accident. I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. She tried to turn away but I blocked the aisle. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. Her lips trembled. She looked at the floor. "I told her it wasn't right," she whispered. "She said you were unstable and shouldn't have access to money." I felt something collapse inside me. 2 weeks later, we sat in a small conference room at the law office. My mom across the table. The man beside her. My hands in my lap so she wouldn't see them shaking. The attorney slid the documents forward. No one raised their voice. The silence was louder than yelling ever could be. My mom read the papers slowly. Her face drained of color. Her mouth opened once, then closed again. The man shifted in his chair, his leg bouncing. "This isn't what you think," my mom said finally, her voice thin. The attorney didn't argue. She just pushed her Alvarez's statement across the table. My mom's shoulders sagged like something heavy had been taken off them. For the first time in years, she didn't look at me like I was a problem. She looked at me like she was afraid. The meeting ended without shouting. No one slammed a door, no one cried. My mom stood up slowly. Like her legs didn't trust her anymore. The man beside her didn't touch her arm this time. He stared at the carpet as if it held the answer to something he had lost. I walked out into the parking lot with my chest tight and my palms damp. The air outside was cold and clean. The kind that makes your lungs hurt for a second. I leaned against my car and closed my eyes. For years I had imagined this moment as something loud. A victory. A scene where I finally said everything I had swallowed. But it wasn't like that. It felt quiet. Almost empty. The next few weeks passed slowly. The legal process moved at its own pace. Files were reviewed. Statements were added. I wasn't suddenly rich. I didn't get my childhood home back. What I did get was the truth, written down in clean lines that no one could erase. One evening, I drove to the lake where my dad used to take me when I was a kid. The parking lot was nearly empty. I sat in my car for a long time before getting out. My hands resting on the steering wheel, my shoulders heavy. The water was still. I could hear birds in the trees behind me, and the faint sound of wind through dry leaves. My breath came slower there. My chest didn't feel like it was caving in any mom. About the way she had held my hand at the funeral. About the way she had stopped looking at me. About the way she had read those papers in silence. I realized I didn't want to fix her. I just didn't want to carry her anymore. A week later, she left me a voicemail. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I don't know what you want from me now," she said. I deleted the message without replying. That night, I cleaned my apartment. Not in a rush. Just moving slowly. Wiping the counters, folding clothes, breathing in the smell of soap. My body felt tired, but not broken. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't racing. And I understood something I hadn't expected. Revenge wasn't a feeling. It was a release. Sitting in my quiet apartment, I finally let myself breathe. The papers were filed. The truth was out. My mother's carefully built life, her secrets, her lies, no longer had power over me. I didn't need to watch her fall. I didn't need to see shame or anger in her eyes. Just knowing the truth, that I hadn't been erased, that her perfect image was no longer untouchable, was enough. I thought back to all the nights I had spent pacing, staring at ceilings, replaying every small betrayal in my mind. The cold dinners, the ignored birthdays. The whispered comments meant to make me feel small. All of it had shaped me, yes, but it hadn't broken me. I realized my dignity wasn't something she could take. It wasn't a thing she could hide under piles of false documents or pretend loyalty. It had always been mine. I understood now that distance was more powerful than confrontation. I didn't need her approval or acknowledgement. I didn't need her apologies, and I didn't need her love. I just needed space to rebuild, to breathe, to be myself without the weight of her judgment pressing down on me. Sometimes, I drive past her house. I see her in the window, carefully arranging flowers or folding laundry, pretending everything is normal. I don't feel anger anymore, I feel relief. Relief that I am no longer tied to her version of what my life should be. Relief that I finally own my own story, my own memories, and my own future. I've learned that survival isn't about taking power from someone else. It's about taking it back for yourself. About reclaiming the life that belongs to you and letting the past sit quietly behind you. I have done that now. I am free. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like a problem. I feel like me. The hum of the city outside my window sounds softer these days. I pour my coffee in the morning, watch the sun rise, and let myself feel small, quiet, patient, but fully alive. And I know I don't need to fight anymore. The truth is mine, my life is mine. And that is enough.